This is now the 7th part of our series on the 10 Commandments. Remember the Sabbath day and keep it holy. We read from Exodus 20.
Remember the Sabbath day by keeping it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the 7th day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. On it you shall not do any work, neither you, nor your son or daughter, nor your male or female servant, nor your animals, nor any foreigner residing in your towns. For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth, the sea, and all that is in them, but he rested on the 7th day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and made it holy.
Okay, so that's the 4th commandment. Takes up a full page of that. You remember when we looked at this, we've been looking at a YouGov poll that was taken about 18 months ago that reflected on how Britons reflected on the importance of the commandment. And the first commandments we dealt with, like murder, steal, and telling lies against people, were rated quite high amongst the public as a whole. But this commandment, remember to keep the Sabbath day holy, is at the bottom of the list, with only 19% of people believing that it's relevant today, which is quite interesting, isn't it? Only 90% of people think this commandment is relevant. And I suppose if we think about it, it's not surprising that this is at the bottom of the list, because people, as we've gone on in recent years, the shops have opened on a Sunday. There's so much other entertainment. Football's now played on a Sunday, and everything else has gone on. But as we'll hear later on, that's probably no reflection on the sense of the commandments and why we should remember these and keep them when we are faced with such an inpouring because of the secularization of our country. And again, this is the same virtually throughout the world. I mean, if we think the shops are open just too much now, Boris Johnson's, I understand, is still considering of suspending Sunday trading laws as well to boost the economy after lockdown and because of Brexit as well. Although that was talked about last summer, nothing seems to become more of it at the same time. But who knows? The Sunday trading laws may be even freed up even more now, and I doubt there will be enough opposition to stop it. So it does say, keep this Sunday holy. What does that mean? Well, God has asked us to keep this day holy, in our case Sundays, but in case of when this was written, of course, it was the Sabbath for the Jews, right from the beginning of time. I mean, he asked us about this. This wasn't new to Moses' generation, but it was said to Adam.
Genesis chapter 2. Thus the heavens and the earth were completed in all their vast array. By the 7th day, God had finished the work he had been doing. So on the 7th day he rested from all his work. Then God blessed the 7th day and made it holy, because on it he rested from all the work of creating that he had done.
So right from the beginning of creation, God called for the 7th day, either Sabbaths or Sundays, to be made holy right from the beginning, which is quite surprising, isn't it? That one, I must admit, overtook me. I didn't think that that was made so early on in the events of the world, but there it was.
In 3, All right, so here we go. According to Genesis, the Lord created everything in 6 days, and then on the seventh day he rested. That is, he stopped. Doesn't mean he took a nap. It means he rested from the work he had done on the previous 6 days. So he blessed that day and he set it apart way back when everything was still perfect, right? Right. 1 day out of 7. Later, I don't know, around 2,500 years or so, way after Adam and Eve ate the forbidden fruit and sin was everywhere, Moses pops up on the scene, hikes up Mount Sinai, and receives 10 commandments from the Lord himself, written by his very finger. You saw the movie. For all you readers out there, take a peek at Exodus 20. Here begins the law, God's commandments. His design, not ours. For our benefit, not his. Now, out of all the 10 commandments, we stop today on the 4th. Remember the Sabbath to keep it holy. And in case we might not connect it on our own, God uses the same language in the first book of the Bible that he does here in the second to connect it for us. And I paraphrase. In 6 days, not 5, not a million years, not an eon, in 6 days God did a bunch of work, making everything that we see and don't see, and he rested on the seventh day. Therefore he blessed it and made it holy. He set it apart. 1 day out of 7. So we got 10 commandments. We got 8 don'ts and 2 do's. But inside one of the do's is a don't, this 4th commandment. The do is to remember the Sabbath by keeping it holy. And the way to keep it holy is the don't. Don't work. Or more accurate to its intent, put aside the normal work you do on the previous 6 days. Make this day different. 1 day out of 7. Okay, so let's leap forward about 1,500 years or so to Mark chapter 2. And you'll see that Jesus says, quite frankly, man wasn't made for the Sabbath, but Sabbath was made for the man. Sabbath was made for the man. Huh. God blessed this day and he set it apart. Why? For what? Well, perhaps it's a date. Maybe God is saying he just wants to spend time with us. Yeah, he created us to do all kinds of things and have friends and family and live our lives, but maybe he's saying he'd like to spend time with us too. Now, he knows we're busy. That's why he gave us 7 days. 6 days to do all the things that we have to do. And 1 day to spend with him. 1 day out of 7.
So remember, we're following the rough book of J. John, who wrote this book some years ago, and he says about this commandment. This commandment is all about time. Like wealth, it's a gift that God gives us. Like wealth, it's something that he expects us to use wisely. And as with wealth, God also expects that we honor him by returning to him at least part of the gift. So it's a gift, this commandment. Time. God doesn't want us to work 7 days a week. Now, we all have to work in some way, but God has decided that it's not good for mankind to work all the time, and therefore we need a day off. And so he commanded us to keep 1 day holy, different from the others, so we can rest and recuperate to enable us to work the other 6 days of the week. And in the past, let's face it, we know the communists, when communist governments first came in at the beginning of the 20th century, the governments there in communist Russia, for instance, tried to change that. They tried to get people to work longer than 6 days without having a break, and abandoning it after a couple of decades because it was quite apparent that it didn't help productivity at all, getting people to work. And people still try it today, isn't it? I notice now, especially in the National Health Service and other services that have to run 7 days a week, they try all sorts of things about work patterns to try things to make efficient. And I don't think any of them come up to trying to make sure people don't work any longer than 6 days. But they still do it today. And I believe that what God says right from the beginning of creation is not good. But we have to do that. We can't live in the same way as Adam and Eve did, or Abraham and all the rest. You know, I was a policeman for 30 odd years. I always worked Sundays, and then I joined a job where I worked Sundays as well. after that. So you know, it's not as simple as it would seem, is it? But the basics of this commandment is that we cannot work all the time. We do need days off from work. And we all know that. Days off with family, days off. When we neglect these things, then things don't go right. So Sabbath, the fourth commandment then, although it's the longest, is probably the most misunderstood of all the commandments, or certainly the last few we'll be tackling shortly. It's certainly about being that. I mean, I always think, going back to Doctor Who said, I never land on Sundays because they're boring. That's not that brilliant a thing. It's just a throwaway comment, but I would suggest a lot of people think Sunday's boring if they've got no relationship to God. That's the problem. If we have a relationship to God, then Sundays are never boring, are they? But there you go. It's all about time. The facts are that as the number of Christians in this country has declined, so has the relevance of this commandment. That's the fact of it. When I was a young lad, you know, most people then, or a good majority of people, went to church. So there was no demand for shops to be open 7 days a week. People were quite happy to rest in that way. In fact, of course, they didn't have a lot else to do at all in those days. On a Sunday, most things were naturally shut on a Sunday, except the really important elements of the country's economy. But of course, all that is changed over the time, and we've had to come to terms with that. Of course, the other thing is about Sundays. Is there a difference between Sundays and the Sabbath? I think there is. It's a great need for that. Although it was regarded as a gift to us, it wasn't designed to limit us, but to liberate us. That was the thing. It was something good that God planned for us, to have a day that was different from other days of the week. And I think that's still true today. Even though people may have to work Sundays, they still need a day that's a bit different from a work day, a day to relax, perhaps to sleep in all morning, or perhaps just to hang about. It's still good for them. But the trouble is that the Sabbath's got a bad name, isn't it? I mean, originally, when the Jews celebrated the Sabbath, which began at sundown on a Friday evening and carried to sundown on the Saturday. So the Sabbath evening, the first part of it, was time for the family. The people, everything could get ready in the workday before the sun went down on the Sabbath Friday evening, and then the family could be together for Sabbath evening, worship in the morning, and relax for the rest of the day. That's how it was designed to work. Of course, that all changed when Christians started to take the Sabbath as the first day of the week, when Jesus rose from the tomb. And so there was a natural change when Christ came into this world and died for us to save us from our sins. The whole thing changed. The emphasis moved to the Christian Sunday. So that's the history of it. And many people think that the Sabbath regulations went out when Christ rose from death, and we started to celebrate that one holy day of the week with Christ's resurrection and the new understanding of God's love for us. The problem is the religious leaders of the Second Temple period, that's the period after the Israelites came back from their exile in Babylon, added so many more new things about what could be done on the Sabbath. Like you couldn't prepare a meal, sew on a button, light a fire, or walk more than 3,000 feet from your home. There were in total 1,521 of these rules to keep the Sabbath, all of them inventions of this period in Jewish history to prevent this commandment being broken, ensuring that no work could take place on a Sabbath. Actually, J. John says, became very hard work. And of course, we know in Jesus's ministry, he had massive trouble with the Sabbath regulations, with the Pharisees and the synagogue leaders at the time.
One Sabbath, Jesus was going through the grain fields. And as his disciples walked along, they began to pick some heads of grain. The Pharisees said to him, "Look, why are they doing what is unlawful on the Sabbath?" He answered, "Have you never read what David did when he and his companions were hungry and in need? In the days of Abiathar the high priest, he entered the house of God and ate the consecrated bread, which is lawful only for priests to eat. And he also gave some to his companions." Then he said to them, "The Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. So the Son of Man is Lord even of the Sabbath."
So Jesus had trouble with the Sabbath. I like that clip because it shows the Jesus really shouting at the Pharisees. Didn't it? I thought that was quite appropriate, the way that was seen, was filmed. But this was the problem. There, the disciples were picking a few heads of corn as they walked through it, and the Pharisees decided that they'd broken the regulations because breaking a head of corn off the stem of corn was classified as reaping. All the regulations got silly. And to some extent, in the years pre the 21st century, we might say, we've had some religious leaders in the Christian world really impose some things on keeping Sundays holy, akin to what the Pharisees were doing in that story of Jesus. But what we cannot forget is that Jesus observed the Sabbath, and so did his disciples, both before and after his death, although the disciples changed it to the first day of the week. J. John says, "I believe that this passage that Jesus would have us observe the Sabbath in whatever appropriate ways we can, certainly attending church and worshipping God, and by having a restful day whenever possible, doing whatever we could for the glory of God." So we can see this from the scriptures that obviously a transition took place between the Old and the New Testament, between the time before Jesus and the time after Jesus. Before Jesus, the Sabbath really commemorated the day that God finished his creation and took a day of rest. And he believed that the people too needed a day of rest. But the New Testament changed that. It became the first day of the week to celebrate Jesus's raising from the dead. And that was the day to celebrate and give God back the time that he'd given us by giving us this day off. That was the natural thing. A day off once a week to celebrate what God had done through Jesus Christ and to rest from work. That's what it should have been right from the beginning of Christianity. But we know it didn't happen that way. People tended to follow what the Old Testament taught, like this passage in Isaiah.
If you keep your feet from breaking the Sabbath and from doing as you please on my holy day, if you call the Sabbath a delight and the Lord's holy day honorable, and if you honor it by not going your own way and not doing as you please or speaking idle words, then you will find your joy in the Lord. And I will cause you to ride in triumph on the heights of the land, and to feast on the inheritance of your father Jacob. For the mouth of the Lord has spoken.
So that's Isaiah really saying that if we keep the Sabbath holy, then there will be spiritual rewards for it. But I think overall, we must take this account. The Old Testament Sabbath was the display of God's saving power. In the New Testament, an understanding of God's grace. Therefore, one was for Israel and the other is for the church. Because in many ways, the Sabbath regulations are thought by me and by many is to not really apply for us Christians today. Christianity, in many ways, takes three views of this. That we get it. You've got a small percentage of Christians, like the Seventh-day Adventists, still think Saturday's the right day to celebrate, and that the church over the centuries is mistaken to switching it by Sunday. Another section of the church has felt that the Christian Sunday should be retained much of the character of the Old Testament. Sabbath believers want to keep Sundays strictly abstaining from work, recreation, and sport. But I think the majority of Christians these days think that we just need to obey the principles of the Sabbath. Each week we are to have one day set aside, especially to honour God and take a break from work. That will keep us following the spiritual aim of the commandment, to keep the day holy, keeping it different. In other words, while we're no longer required to keep the Sabbath regulations as in the Old Testament, it's no bad thing that we allow ourselves our own special Sabbath. And J. John agrees with me on this, or do I agree with him? I don't know. The position of the majority of Christians today, while we are no longer required to keep the Sabbath, it's no bad thing that we allow ourselves a Sabbath. Remembering that the major reason we have this day or celebrate this day is to have a break from work and to recover energy, I would think. And that's what's the most important thing. And that would help us keep healthy. You can't keep on working day in, day out, all hours of the day. And perhaps even for the first time we've seen that in the lockdown, there is extreme pressure on that from our employers, in sense of those there that they think that people are working at home, they can, because they're working at home, they can work harder and longer hours, which wouldn't be the case if they went to work. So we have to remember that, and we have to remember that the church of the Middle Ages imposed some really bad things about keeping the Sabbath and piled on the guilt for people who didn't keep it. What we do need to remember is that Jesus did keep the Sabbath. We're told that in Scripture, but he didn't keep it as strictly as the Pharisees and the other Christian leaders at the time. So one thing we go on then, one thing we must not forget is Jesus kept the Sabbath. And I'm sure God intended us for our holy day, whatever day we celebrate it, to be a day of blessing for us, a day of change from the routines of the work. I like what Arthur Pink says, who's a 19th century theologian that many of my teachers in Bible school often quoted on all sorts of things. Arthur Pink. A Sabbath well spent brings a week of content and health for the toils of the morrow. But a Sabbath profound, whatever may be gained, is a certain forerunner of sorrow. So, as we conclude this then, what should our attitude to the Sabbath be today? What should the attitude of the Sabbath be for us today? How relevant is it today? The Sabbath rules are dead, but the Sabbath principles remain. For many people, they have to work on a Sunday now, our Sabbath. They've got no alternative. That's the way they can make a living, feed their family. And we've had to adapt to more than that all the years since the law changed in 1994, which is the law that's affected most of us. But we need to keep a Sabbath, a day holy. We need to take time out to worship God. Now, the polls may suggest most people aren't bothered. But if we want a good relationship to God, then regardless of the pressures of modern society, we still need to remember that Sunday's a gift to us from God, and we should spend some time with him worshipping God on a Sunday. And, you know, if our current job doesn't meet up to that standards, then perhaps we should seek a change. You know, that's nothing unusual for people who become Christians, may need to seek a change. And if that's right for them, then God will help them. But that doesn't mean that doctors and nurses and policemen and firemen and all the other people that we rely on to work on a Sunday should feel guilty about it, because these jobs need to be done. Let's finish by listening to some words from my favourite theologian.
Our second question comes from Tom. He knows you dealt with the Hebrew roots movement a bit, and he would like your take on the Sabbath at some point, and specifically, how are Christians supposed to observe it?
Yeah, this actually, again, I think it's pretty easy to tell that this question sort of gets into also the issue of, is Sunday the Sabbath? You know, what the whole Lord's Day question. I think it's safe to assume, both from the New Testament and also early church history, that you did have Christians keeping Sabbath throughout the early church period, the apostolic period, and of course, beyond that. Jesus kept the Sabbath, so that wouldn't be anything unusual. Easter in the early church was observed on an annual basis in connection with Passover. So there you have, again, another Israelite Jewish holy day. So this sort of mixture is not a surprise in any regard. You have Paul talking to the Corinthians about laying up, money on the first day of the week. The traditional approach, again, to that passage sort of assumes that why would Paul mention the first day of the week unless there was some sort of formal gathering, special occasion? But again, Paul never actually comes out and says that. There's no command to meet on the first day of the week. It's just something in the New Testament that you more or less observe. We read it and we see that, the first day of the week, that's the day the Lord rose, people were getting together. But there's no actual command that replaces the Sabbath with this day, or does anything vice versa. It really, you don't get anything that formal. So just in a general sense, the evidence for or against both really a weekly remembering of the resurrection in the apostolic age, or saying that this is the new Sabbath, so we must meet, we must do a particular thing on this day. The evidence for a sanctioned, official, mandatory meeting, whether it was thought of as the Sabbath or as the Lord's Day, is very ambiguous with respect to Scripture. Again, you read it happening, But again, there's no formal command. Now that plays into this whole question about observing the Sabbath. What should Christians do? There's no requirement of Sabbath, just like there was no requirement of a Sunday Lord's Day meeting. Both of them happened. You look at a passage like Acts 2, verse 46. Again, we passed over this, but if you go to Acts 2:46, it's again something that's easily missed. It says, day by day, attending the temple together and breaking bread in their homes. The Christians received their food with glad, So they were actually doing both. Early believers were doing things at the temple, and they were meeting house to house. And then again, in certain contexts, we see them meeting on the Lord's Day as well. But there's no formalization of any of it. And so to argue, any one of these positions that.
Right. Okay. He does go on a bit. I'll put a link in when I publish it. For the rest of it, you can go on. But I think you got the thing. There's no law, no commands. Not even Paul says you've got to meet on a Sunday or a Sabbath. It was something that was just adopted and adapted to meet their needs. And therefore, I conclude that keeping the Sunday holy these days means that we need to honour God on that day somehow, but it doesn't stop us working or doing other things. Okay, so next week then we would look on this lovely one. Thou shalt not take the Lord's name in vain.